What happens when two of the most outspoken figures in America sit down face to face with no script, no filter, and absolutely zero plans to back down? The tension was so thick you could feel it through the screen. What began as a standard late-night interview quickly devolved into one of the most explosive showdowns ever broadcast live. Before we get into what actually went down, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments whose side you're on, because trust me, you'll have an opinion. The studio buzzed with nervous anticipation. Jimmy Kimmel strode out to thunderous applause, that trademark smirk plastered on his face. Straightening his tie, he slid into his chair behind the desk and launched into his monologue with his usual razor-sharp wit. But everyone knew what they were really waiting for. The guest list had been public for days, and social media had been on fire ever since. Donald Trump was coming to Jimmy Kimmel Live. Nobody quite knew what to expect. As Jimmy wrapped up his monologue, he glanced at the camera with a mischievous glint his audience knew all too well. "All right," he said, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "Our guest tonight needs no introduction. Businessman, reality star, former president, and apparently brave enough to sit down with me. Please welcome Donald Trump." The band struck up and Trump entered, both hands raised high, waving to a crowd that answered with a mix of cheers, boos, and curious applause. He made his way to the guest chair, clasped Jimmy's hand with his trademark firm grip, and settled in like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Donald Trump, welcome to the show," Jimmy said. "Jimmy, great to be here," Trump replied, nodding. "Fantastic audience. Really fantastic. Thank you," Jimmy said, his tone edged with skepticism. "I have to say, I'm a little surprised you agreed to come on. We haven't exactly been best friends over the years," Trump chuckled. A low rumble. No, we haven't. But you know what? It's important to talk to everyone, even people who don't agree with you. That's what makes America great. Freedom of speech. Freedom to have different opinions. Freedom of speech," Jimmy echoed, nodding slowly. "So, speaking of opinions, let's talk about some of yours. You've been pretty vocal lately about the economy, immigration, the current administration. Where do you even want to start?" Trump shifted in his seat, getting comfortable. "Let's start with the economy. Because frankly, Jimmy, it's a disaster. Total disaster. When I was in office, we had the best economy this country has ever seen. Lowest unemployment, highest stock market. Businesses thriving. Now it's all going downhill." Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but to be fair, a lot of economists would disagree. The current numbers show unemployment is still relatively low, and the stock market's been performing well." Jimmy, Trump said, shaking his head with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're reading the wrong numbers, listening to the wrong people. The real economy, the one everyday Americans experience, that's what matters. And everyday Americans are struggling. They're paying more for gas, more for groceries, more for everything. That's the real story." "But isn't that partly due to global inflation?" Jimmy countered. "This isn't just happening in America. It's happening all over the world. Supply chain issues, the pandemic aftermath. These are complex problems." Trump waved a hand dismissively. "Global inflation, supply chain issues, just excuses. When I was president, I handled things differently. I made deals, real deals, not weak deals. I know how to negotiate. I know how to get things done," the audience murmured. Some nodding, others shaking their heads. Jimmy leaned forward, his tone tightening. "Okay, so let's talk about deals. Let's talk about negotiations. One of the things you've been heavily criticized for is your approach to international relations. Some people say you alienated our allies, cozied up to dictators, and made America less safe." Trump's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "That's fake news, Jimmy. Total fake news. I had great relationships with world leaders. They respected me. They respected America. We weren't being taken advantage of anymore. Countries were finally paying their fair share for defense, for trade. I made America strong again. But what about the relationships that were damaged? Jimmy pressed. What about the allies who felt betrayed? The agreements that were torn up? The trust that was broken? Trust? Trump repeated, his voice rising slightly. You want to talk about trust? Let me tell you about trust, Jimmy. Trust is earned. And for decades, other countries were taking advantage of American trust, using us, draining our resources. And what did we get in return? Nothing. I changed that. I put America first. Jimmy nodded slowly, his expression neutral, but his eyes cutting sharp. America first. That's been your slogan, your mantra. But here's what I don't get. When you say America first, what does that actually mean? Because to a lot of people it sounds like America alone. It sounds like isolationism. It sounds like turning our backs on the rest of the world. That's a very naive way of looking at it, Jimmy, Trump said, his tone cooling, his voice hardening. Very naive. America first doesn't mean America alone. It means we prioritize our own interests, our own citizens, before rushing off to solve everyone else's problems. It means we don't send billions of dollars overseas while Americans are suffering at home. It means we take care of our own people first. Is that really so controversial? It's not controversial to want to take care of Americans, Jimmy agreed, leaning forward. But the way you went about it, the rhetoric you used, the policies you implemented, those things had consequences. Real consequences for real people. Trump leaned forward now, eyes narrowing. Everything has consequences, Jimmy. Every decision a leader makes has consequences. But at least I was willing to make the tough decisions. At least I wasn't afraid to shake things up, to challenge the status quo. That's what leaders do. Okay, Jimmy said, holding up a finger. Let's talk about leadership then. Let's talk about what happened on January 6th. Because that's something we can't just gloss over. That's something a lot of Americans, myself included, are still trying to understand. The studio atmosphere shifted instantly. The audience went silent, the tension ratcheting up several notches. Trump's expression hardened. His posture stiffened in his chair. Here we go, Trump said, shaking his head. I knew you'd bring this up. I knew it. Of course I'm bringing it up, Jimmy said firmly. It's one of the most significant events in modern American history. People stormed the Capitol. People died. And you were the president. You were the one who told them to march. I told them to march peacefully, Trump shot back, his voice sharp. Peacefully and patriotically. Those were my exact words, Jimmy. But nobody wants to talk about that, do they? Nobody wants to talk about the peaceful part. They just want to blame me for everything. But you also told them the election was stolen, Jimmy countered. You told them for months it was rigged, that it was being stolen from you. And despite dozens of court cases, recounts, audits, even your own officials telling you there was no evidence of widespread fraud, you kept saying it. You kept pushing that narrative. People believed you, and then they acted on it. Trump's face flushed red. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. The election was stolen, Jimmy. It was absolutely stolen. There's overwhelming evidence, massive evidence, but nobody wants to look at it. The media won't cover it. The courts won't hear it. But the American people know the truth. They know what happened. No, Donald, they don't know that, Jimmy said, his voice rising to match Trump's. Because it didn't happen. It's been investigated thoroughly, repeatedly. Every single time the conclusion is the same. There was no widespread fraud. You lost the election fair and square. Trump shot to his feet, face crimson, finger jabbing toward Jimmy. You know what, Jimmy? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly the problem with people like you. You sit here in your comfortable studio with your writers feeding you lines, and you think you know everything. You think you have all the answers, but you don't know anything about what really happened. Jimmy stood too, not backing down an inch. I know what the facts say. I know what the evidence shows. And I know you can't just invent your own reality because you don't like the one we're living in. Facts. Trump scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. You want to talk about facts? Let me give you some facts. There were massive irregularities in multiple states. Mail-in ballots that couldn't be verified. Voting machines that were compromised. Poll watchers who weren't allowed to do their jobs. Dead people voting. That's not made up, Jimmy. That's real. No, it's not real, Jimmy said, his voice firm and unwavering. Every single one of those claims has been debunked, Jimmy said, his voice like steel. Every single one. Your own attorney general told you there was no evidence. Your own campaign officials told you there was no evidence. Even judges you appointed told you there was no evidence. At what point do you accept reality? At what point do you start asking the right questions? Trump's reply was instant, his tone like a snap of ice. At what point do you stop being a mouthpiece for the establishment and start thinking for yourself? You're just like all the rest of them, Jimmy. Just another puppet reading from a script. The audience erupted, some people standing, some shouting, the whole studio electric with tension. Off to the side, Jimmy's producer could be seen motioning nervously, but Jimmy waved him off. I'm not a puppet, Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the chaos. And I'm not reading from a script. I'm asking you legitimate questions that millions of Americans want answers to. And instead of answering them honestly, you're deflecting. You're attacking me personally. That's what you always do when you don't have a real answer. I have plenty of real answers, Trump snapped back. But you don't want to hear them. You've already made up your mind. You decided a long time ago that you hate me, that you hate everything I stand for, and nothing I say is going to change that. This isn't about hate, Jimmy shot back, shaking his head. This is about accountability. This is about responsibility. You were the President of the United States. You had a duty to uphold the Constitution, to protect democracy, to tell people the truth, and instead you lied. You lied repeatedly, and those lies had consequences. Real consequences. Trump stepped closer to the desk, his voice low and menacing. I never lied, Jimmy. Not once. Everything I said was true. And history is going to prove me right. You watch. When the real truth finally surfaces, you're gonna look like a fool. I'm willing to take that chance, Jimmy said, matching Trump's intensity. But right now, in this moment, based on everything we know, based on all the evidence, based on the conclusions of countless investigations, you're wrong. You're simply wrong. I'm never wrong, Trump said flatly. That's something you need to understand about me, Jimmy. I'm never wrong. I have instincts other people don't have. I see things other people miss. That's why I was successful in business. That's why I won the presidency. And that's why I know, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the election was stolen from me. Jimmy exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Okay, he said. Let's try a different approach. Let's say, hypothetically, you're right. Let's say the election was stolen. What would you have wanted to happen on January 6th? What was the goal? Trump sat back down, his posture relaxing but his eyes still burning. The goal was to have our voices heard. The goal was to make sure Congress knew that millions of Americans had concerns about the integrity of the election. That's all. It was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration of our First Amendment rights. But it wasn't peaceful, Jimmy said, sitting back down too. It turned violent. People broke into the Capitol. They assaulted police officers. They threatened members of Congress. That's not a peaceful demonstration. That's an insurrection. That's a very strong word, Jimmy, Trump said, his tone turning almost condescending. Insurrection. You know what an actual insurrection looks like? It looks very different from what happened that day. What happened was a protest that got out of hand. Yes, some people did things they shouldn't have done. But the vast majority were peaceful, patriotic Americans exercising their rights. Some people did things they shouldn't have done? Jimmy repeated, incredulous. They tried to stop the certification of a democratic election. They wanted to overturn the will of the voters. How is that not an attack on democracy itself? Because the will of the voters was already being overturned. Trump shot back. That's the whole point. The real attack on democracy was the stolen election. What happened on January 6th was people trying to defend democracy, not attack it. Jimmy stared at him for a long moment, his face a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Do you really believe that? Do you honestly, truly believe that? With every fiber of my being, Trump said without hesitation. Absolutely. Then we have a serious problem, Jimmy said quietly. Because if you believe that, and millions of your supporters believe that, then we're not even living in the same reality anymore. We can't have a functioning democracy if we can't even agree on basic facts. Then maybe the problem isn't with me, Trump suggested. Maybe the problem is with a media establishment that refuses to investigate the truth. Maybe the problem is with a political system so corrupt, so rigged, that people like you can't even see it anymore. Or maybe, Jimmy said, leaning forward, just maybe the problem is with a man who can't accept that he lost. A man whose ego is so fragile, whose need to win is so overwhelming, that he's willing to tear the whole country apart rather than admit defeat. Trump's eyes flashed dangerously. My ego. You want to talk about ego? Let me tell you something about ego, Jimmy. I built an empire. Then how can anyone ever hold you accountable? How can there be any truth at all if the only truth that exists is whatever you say it is? Trump crossed his arms, his expression defiant. Because I've seen the corruption, Jimmy. I've lived it. I've dealt with these people. The politicians, the lobbyists, the networks. They all want control. They want to tell people what to think, what to believe. I refuse to play along. That's why they hate me. Jimmy leaned forward, his tone soft but cutting. Or maybe they hate you because you made everything about you. Because instead of trying to bring people together, you kept driving them further apart. Every time someone disagreed with you, you made them an enemy. Trump's eyes narrowed. I didn't divide the country. The country was already divided long before I came along. The difference is, I exposed it. I made people see what was really going on. Exposing division isn't the same as healing it, Jimmy said. You had the power to make things better. You could have calmed the anger. You could have told people the truth. Instead, you fueled the fire. You turned outrage into a political weapon. Trump smirked slightly. You think I created outrage? The outrage was already there. I just gave it a voice. I spoke for people who'd been ignored, dismissed, laughed at by people like you. Jimmy nodded slowly. And maybe at first, that meant something real. Maybe it started with good intentions, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about them, and it became about you, about your image, your pride, your need to win, no matter the cost. For a moment, the studio was silent. Trump looked at Jimmy, his expression unreadable. You don't get it, he said finally. You've never been in a position where the entire system is trying to destroy you. When everyone is lying about you, you fight back. You don't just roll over and take it. And maybe that's the tragedy, Jimmy replied quietly, that you can't tell the difference anymore between fighting for yourself and fighting for something bigger. Between power and principle. The audience was dead still now, hanging on every word. Trump's jaw tightened, his voice low. You'll see, Jimmy. One day the truth will come out. And when it does, all of you, the media, the politicians, the late-night hosts, you'll all owe me an apology. Jimmy looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, if that day ever comes, I'll be the first to say I was wrong. But until then, I'll keep asking questions. Because that's what accountability looks like. Trump straightened his jacket, his expression unreadable. You'll see, he repeated, his tone flat. You'll all see. The crowd didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. The tension was thick enough to cut. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment heavy in his eyes. "Maybe," he said finally. "But tonight, what everyone's seeing is the truth." Trump leaned back slightly, his tone lowering but his stare unflinching. "Doesn't that seem like maybe you're just trying to discredit anyone who holds you accountable?" Jimmy didn't blink. "Or maybe you're trying to discredit everyone who won't agree with you." "Or maybe I'm right," Trump said, his words slow and deliberate. "Maybe the media really is biased. Have you ever considered that possibility, Jimmy? There's a difference between bias and fabrication," Jimmy replied. "When you call everything fake news, when you dismiss every critical report as a lie, you're not exposing bias. You're trying to create a world where the only truth is whatever you say it is." Trump smiled, that thin, practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you're trying to create a world where the only truth is whatever the establishment says it is. So what's the difference?" "The difference," Jimmy said firmly, leaning forward, "is evidence. Facts that can be verified. Sources that can be checked. That's the difference between journalism and propaganda. Even if every journalist had some anti-Trump agenda," Jimmy continued, his voice rising with emotion, "that still wouldn't make your lies true. You still lost the election. January 6th still happened. You can attack the media all you want, but that doesn't change reality." "There you go again with reality," Trump said, almost laughing. "How do you know your reality is the right one? How do you know you're not the one who's been deceived?" Jimmy exhaled sharply, tired but unyielding. "Because thousands of journalists, investigators, experts, and officials from every background came to the same conclusions. At some point you have to ask yourself, is it more likely that all of them are wrong? Or that you are? All of those people are part of the same system." Trump shot back. "Of course they're going to come to the same conclusions. They're all reading from the same playbook." He stood up again, slower this time. The anger in his face faded into something colder, a calculated calm. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight thinking maybe we could have a real conversation. I thought maybe, just maybe, you would actually listen instead of lecture. But I was wrong. You're exactly what I thought you were. Another talking head who thinks he's smarter than everyone else." "And you're exactly what I thought you were," Jimmy replied, rising too. "Someone who can't accept responsibility for anything. Someone who blames everyone else for their problems. Someone who'd rather tear down the entire system than admit they made mistakes." "I don't make mistakes," Trump said coldly. "I make decisions, and sometimes those decisions don't work out the way other people want them to. But that doesn't make them mistakes. That just makes them unpopular with people like you." "You know what's unpopular?" Jimmy fired back. "Lying to the American people, inciting violence, refusing to respect the peaceful transfer of power. Those aren't just unpopular. They're dangerous. They're un-American. And the fact that you can't see that you still defend those actions, that terrifies me." Trump pointed straight at him, his voice steady but sharp. "You want to be terrified? Be terrified of what's happening to this country under weak leadership. Be terrified of open borders, of crime, of inflation, of America losing its place in the world. Those are real things to fear, not me. I'm trying to fix those problems." "By dividing us?" Jimmy shot back. "By turning Americans against each other. By making people distrust their own institutions, their own neighbors. That's your solution?" "Sometimes you have to break things before you can fix them," Trump said. "Sometimes you have to disrupt the system before you can make it better. That's what I do. I'm a disruptor." "No," Jimmy said quietly, shaking his head. "You're a destroyer. There's a difference. A disruptor challenges the system to make it better. A destroyer just tears everything down, without caring what comes next. And that's what you've done. You've destroyed faith in elections, destroyed trust in the media, destroyed the norms that hold this country together. And for what? For your own ego? For your pride?" Trump's jaw tightened, his voice turning icy. You don't know anything about me, Jimmy. You don't know what I've sacrificed. I could have stayed in my comfortable life, making money, enjoying success, but I chose to fight for this country, and all I've gotten in return is attacks from people like you. Maybe because the way you fight is wrong, Jimmy said softly. Maybe because the things you're fighting for aren't actually good for the country. Maybe because your vision of America isn't one most of us want to live in. Then you're going to lose, Trump said simply, because my vision, the vision of making America strong again, putting Americans first, standing up to our enemies. That's what the real America wants. Not your version, not the coastal elite version, the real America. The real America, Jimmy repeated. You keep saying that like you own it, like you're the only one who understands it. But America is bigger than you. It's more diverse, more complex, more beautiful than your narrow vision of it. And most Americans, the real Americans, as you call them, they don't want what you're selling. That's why you lost. Trump's lips curled into a cold smile. We'll see about that, won't we? We'll see who history remembers. We'll see whose version of America wins in the end. I guess we will, Jimmy said. But in the meantime, I hope you understand the damage you've done. That your words have consequences. That leadership means more than applause lines. Trump buttoned his jacket, his voice calm but final. And I hope you understand that people are tired of being lectured by people like you. They're tired of being told what to think, what to feel, what's acceptable and what's not. They want someone who speaks their language. Someone real. That's why they love me. The show cut to commercial. But the moment had already been captured, already recorded, already released into the world, where it would be debated, dissected and replayed for weeks, maybe years. Two men, two Americas, two versions of truth, clashing in real time, with no resolution, no bridge between them, only the same divide that brought them here in the first place. So there you have it, an interview that started tense and ended in total chaos. Two strong personalities refusing to back down, each convinced they were absolutely right. Now we want to hear from you. Who made the stronger case? Do conversations like this help? Or just make things worse? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And tell us, can these two ever have a civil conversation again? Or is the divide just too deep?